The most detailed aspect of commercial property management is the recovery of operating costs or escalations. The Commercial Cost Recoveries module automates these processes for you, which can ultimately save you days' worth of work while minimizing calculation errors. It's important to keep in mind that this is an extremely feature-rich and flexible module. Because of the vast feature list of this module, we'll only be covering the core functionality. However, if you require additional information on its capabilities, please contact your Spectra representative. Let's begin our review of the Commercial Cost Recoveries module by looking at the features you'll see on the tenant's database record. The first tab we'll look at is the Charges tab. If you budget bill your tenants an estimated amount each month and then adjust to actual later, you'll simply add the monthly charges on this screen. Let's look at a charge that we already have set up. The type of charge and charge code is specified. The frequency of the charge is selected, and of course the amount of the charge is defined. The recovery flag checkbox is selected, and as with all other charges, a start date and end date, if known, is set. The next tab we'll review on the tenant's file is the Recoveries tab. It is on this tab that you'll define the tenant's specific recovery terms and calculations. We'll look at each individual field on this screen. However, please know that not all fields are required and are there to provide you with the most flexibility possible when negotiating and entering tenants' recovery calculations. Prior to setting the recovery calculation up on the tenant database record, you'll define the range of accounts to be recovered on the building database record. To simplify the creation of the recovery calculation on the tenant's files, Spectra includes a Create button, which copies the defaults created on the building database record to the tenant's recovery. You can then modify as required for each tenant. Starting in the top right-hand corner, the building and unit is specified. Next, you'll select the recovery code, which is completely user-defined. The sequence field allows you to control the order in which your recoveries print on the invoice. The next field, recovery type, there are two options: recovery calculation or mill rate calculation. The most common one is recovery calculation. The mill rate calculation is used for property tax recoveries based on the unit assessment. Enter the current year into recovery year. Spectra is capable of handling base year calculations. If you use base years, you can enter the base year here. A base year override days field appears if a year is entered in the base year field. It is used if you wish to prorate the base year amount. Next, enter the year end for this calculation. You will have the option of billing your tenants annually, semi-annually, quarterly, or monthly. The bill frequency field is where you'll specify this. If the lease specifies that the tenant is responsible for a definite percentage, then enter that percentage in the tenant share field. If this percentage is left blank, the system will calculate the tenant's proportionate share based on their area leased. If the lease states that the tenant pays a minimum or a maximum amount each bill frequency, enter these amounts in the minimum or maximum fields. Next, you'll be able to specify an admin fee percentage, which will be charged over and above the regular expenses. When initially setting up the recovery, the start date will automatically default to today's date, although you can manually change this if needed. The ending date is generally left blank so that when the recovery process is completed for the current period, the next period's recovery record is automatically set up. However, there are a few times when the end date will come in handy, such as when a tenant moves out partway through the year and you'd like the system to calculate their proportionate share after the move-out date. Next, we'll select the budget code, which again is a user-definable field and set up beforehand. Check the Calculate per square foot checkbox if you'd like your calculations to be based on a per square foot basis. The expenses accumulation cap field is used if the lease specifies that the expenses can only go to a certain dollar figure. Next is the days occupancy override field. Using this field enables Spectra to prorate expenses automatically on the basis of the number of days occupancy. Spectra automatically uses the building's gross leasable area, which is specified on the building database record. However, if this area is specified differently on the lease, you can enter the new area in the building area override field. The area leased override field uses the same concept but refers to tenant's leased area. Finally, the override expense amount can be used if you don't want the system to use the actual expense amount recorded in the general ledger account specified below. In the lower section of this screen, we'll define the expenses we'll recover and the percentage of each recoverable expense, as well as the order in which they display on the invoice. First, choose the building this expense is associated to. An example of when you'll use multiple buildings for a single recovery is if a parking lot is split between two buildings. The sequence number defines the order in which the named expenses will appear on the invoice. The named expense field is a free-form field and is what will appear on the tenant's invoice. Next is where we'll specify the general ledger account or general ledger account ranges that relate to the named expense. The percentage field will default to 100% but can be changed if required. Lastly, the expense override field will allow you to override the calculation with a fixed dollar amount. Also on the tenant's database file is the CPI tab. This tab is required if you use the Consumer Price Index for escalations. Now let's look at how we run cost recoveries in Spectra. In the Tasks and Reports area, choose Building, then choose Cost Recovery Format 1. If you'd like to first review the information the system will use to calculate the tenant's billing, then select the Cost Recovery Summary Report. You can choose all buildings, a portfolio, or selected buildings to view. Next, you can select specific recovery codes, but if you'd like to see them all, simply leave this area blank. Choose the Report as of date and run the report. A sample of this report can be found in the Report section of this overview. Once you've reviewed this report for accuracy, you're then ready to run recoveries. You'll have two invoice format choices. Cost Recovery Format 1, which will print multiple recoveries on the same invoice, and Cost Recovery Format 2, which will print each recovery on its own invoice. We'll run Cost Recovery Format 1, but please refer to the Report section of this overview for samples of each format. Choose the Cost Recoveries option. First, you'll select the portfolio or buildings you want to run recoveries for. Second, select specific recovery codes to process. If no individual codes are selected, the system will pick up all applicable codes at this point. In the next quadrant, you'll have some report detail selections to choose from, such as printing individual accounts or account ranges. Then, select your posting date and your process up to month. In the Reporting Options quadrant, you can choose whether or not tenants will receive a credit and how you'd like the report to sort. If you'd like to review the calculations prior to running the process, choose Report Only. To process recoveries and update the tenant files and general ledger, choose Report and Update. You'll now have two options. You can export the invoices to Microsoft Word for further formatting, or you can simply print the invoices. Because of Spectra's seamless integration with Microsoft, this export to Word feature maintains the invoices formatting. Finally, choose the Process Regular Recoveries button to start running the recovery process. After your recoveries are run, recovery records will automatically be set up for the next year or recovery period.